They thought the room was theirs. Every voice puffed with false confidence, every gesture dripping with arrogance. They mistook loudness for strength, assuming the one who spoke the most had the most control. But then you spoke. You didn't shout. You didn't fight to dominate. You didn't claw for attention. You dropped words sharp enough to slice through pride like glass, and the silence that followed was deafening. Nah, you didn't need to kill the whole room's ego. But you did, because ego feeds on illusion, and your clarity starved it. In that moment, they weren't just quiet. They were shattered by the realization that their noise was never substance. Their image was never power, and their posturing crumbled when faced with someone who didn't need to perform. Ego builds walls around fragile minds. They cover insecurity with arrogance, mask doubt with bravado, and pretend strength while trembling beneath the surface. That entire room was full of masks, but you didn't play their game. You didn't walk in to compete with illusions. You walked in carrying truth like a blade, and truth cuts deeper than ego can withstand. When you dismantled them, it wasn't cruelty, it was exposure. They weren't ready to see themselves without the shield of their pride. You didn't scream. You simply spoke with certainty, and that certainty made their walls transparent. They saw each other for what they really were, and worse, they saw themselves. That is why the silence was heavy. Awareness makes mirrors out of words, and ego always breaks in front of mirrors. They expected another fragile opponent. They thought you would play by the unspoken rules of the room. Nod when they boast, stay small when they posture, laugh at the jokes that serve no one but the speaker. But you broke that rhythm. You refused to validate their illusions. You didn't need to flex, yet every word revealed you could. You didn't need to win, yet every sentence confirmed you already had. That is what killed their egos. They thought their dominance came from volume. They learned that true dominance comes from restraint, from control, from composure that makes everyone else realize how desperate they actually look. You didn't compete. You exposed. And exposure is the one thing egos cannot survive. Psychology shows that ego collapses when faced with indifference. Their pride expected your resistance, expected a challenge, expected you to fight for space in the same way they did. But your refusal to engage in their game dismantled them faster than any argument could. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't match their energy. You remained still, sharp, deliberate. That composure became a mirror that reflected how frantic they were. They saw the difference instantly. They were noise, you were presence. And presence always kills ego. Because ego is only powerful when it goes unchallenged. By standing firm, by not feeding their performance, you shattered their illusions without lifting more than a word. Rooms built on ego thrive on fragile alliances. Each person in that circle was trying to outshine the next, even while pretending to support one another. Their unity was fake, their confidence borrowed, their loyalty conditional. Your words didn't just kill individual egos, they cracked the entire network. Suddenly, they weren't allies anymore. They were exposed competitors, embarrassed in front of each other by your calm. You didn't need to break them apart. They broke themselves apart the moment they realized your presence revealed who was real and who was fragile. A room built on ego collapses when confronted with truth, because truth makes enemies out of allies who only bonded over illusions. They didn't hate your words. They hated the fact they couldn't respond to them. That silence haunted them more than any argument could. They rehearsed rebuttals in their heads, but found nothing solid to stand on. You had already cut too cleanly. Ego thrives on clutter, on confusion, on layered noise that distracts from emptiness. You stripped all of that away. You spoke once, and they had nowhere left to go. Their silence was not respect, it was shock. And shock is deadly to ego because ego needs constant fuel. You denied it. That denial starved them. And nothing is more terrifying than realizing someone can take your power without even trying. What made your move deadlier was that you didn't plan it for effect. You didn't speak to win over the room. You spoke because you were aligned with yourself. That authenticity was foreign to them. They couldn't understand how someone could carry authority without seeking validation. They couldn't process how someone could win without even trying to compete. But that is the paradox that shattered them. The less you needed their approval, the more undeniable your presence became. They realized in that moment that their entire lives were chained to proving themselves, while you walked in free. Freedom itself became the weapon that killed their egos. In relationships, ego is often disguised as love. People claim loyalty but demand submission. They call it partnership while secretly playing for dominance. You have seen through that illusion. You dismantled it by refusing to shrink, refusing to perform, refusing to let ego control the dynamic. That same discipline carried into the room. You treated every ego like a mask, not an authority. And when you spoke, you did not try to win them over. You simply removed the mask. That exposure wasn't loud, but it was final. Because once an ego is unmasked, it cannot return to the same power it once held. They thought they could shame you, mock you, or drown you with volume. But their tactics backfired the moment you answered with presence. Your words didn't just silence them, they rewired the room. From that day, their circle carried the memory of how quickly their egos collapsed. And though they may never admit it, that silence taught them more than any applause could. They learned the hard truth: ego may win temporary battles, but awareness, composure, and authenticity win the war. And you carried all three in your reply. Illusions keep people addicted. They wrap themselves in the comfort of half-truths because reality cuts too sharply. They tell themselves the relationship is solid when it's already cracked. They pretend their friends are loyal while knowing envy drips from their words. They convince themselves they are working hard when in truth they are standing still. They need the illusion because the truth feels unbearable. You, however, ripped away that comfort. You stopped drinking from the well of lies and chose to taste the bitterness of reality. And though it was hard at first, it made you stronger. That is why they fear you. You are not addicted to illusions anymore. You are addicted to truth, and truth burns away every mask they cling to. They depend on illusions the way addicts depend on smoke. It numbs them. It lets them escape accountability. They cannot face their weakness, so they inflate it into strength. They cannot admit their jealousy, so they twist it into advice. They cannot admit their betrayal, so they disguise it as survival. Their illusions are not harmless. They are survival mechanisms. They need to believe them because if they didn't, their entire identity would collapse. And this is where you hold the advantage. You accepted collapse. You let the lies fall away. You built from rubble while they kept patching cracks. Their illusions trapped them in cycles, but your honesty freed you from the cage. In relationships, illusions are the most dangerous drug. They convince themselves passion is love. They mistake control for protection. They cling to the illusion of forever, even when trust has died. They stay because leaving forces them to face the truth. They wasted time on a mask. You learned to let illusions break instead of keeping them alive. You stopped calling instability excitement. You stopped naming manipulation care. You stopped believing apologies without action. That shift liberated you. It killed their power. Because people who depend on illusions lose control when you no longer share the same addiction. They are trapped in a play while you have already walked out of the theater. In self-growth, illusions keep people stagnant. They say they'll change tomorrow. They believe the illusion that one day motivation will strike. They pretend discipline is too hard, so they cling to excuses. Those illusions soothe them, but they poison them too. You dismantled your excuses. You stopped telling yourself you'd start later. You stopped pretending the work was harder than it was. You chose reality, no matter how heavy. And that choice made you unstoppable. They are addicted to the illusion of future potential. You live in the reality of current action. That difference separates the dreamers from the doers. And the doers always rise. Psychology proves this. People prefer comforting lies over painful truths. They defend illusions, because illusions protect their fragile sense of self. But illusions delay the inevitable. You cannot lie forever. Sooner or later, the truth surfaces, and when it does, the addicted collapse because they never prepared. You, on the other hand, embraced the truth before it hit. You trained under it. You grew under it. That's why nothing shakes you now. They thought illusions kept them safe, but the lies they protected themselves with became the knives that cut them when reality arrived. Your truth, hardened resilience became your armor, and their illusions became their downfall. They thought illusions would protect their ego. They thought if they never admitted weakness, no one would see it. But weakness doesn't disappear because it is denied. It grows in silence. And when it grows unchecked, it destroys from within. You saw your weaknesses and faced them. That's what makes you dangerous. You don't fear flaws. You don't cover them up with illusions. You strip them bare and turn them into strength. They can't comprehend that. They are still trying to polish glass and pretend it's diamond. You already built a fortress from stone. Their illusions blind them, but your clarity keeps you moving. Illusions also create dependency on others. They think if someone praises them, they are worthy. If someone accepts them, they have value. They cling to illusions because they don't want to face that worth comes from within. You broke that dependency. You stopped needing applause to keep walking. You stopped needing validation to keep working. That independence scared them more than anything. They want you addicted to illusions like they are, because it keeps you predictable. But once you reject illusions, you become free, and freedom is terrifying to those who are still chained. They mocked your awareness, calling you cold, detached, or distant. That was projection. What they feared was not your coldness, it was your clarity. Because illusions thrive only when people refuse to see. And you saw. You saw the lies behind their smiles, the envy behind their compliments, the weakness behind their boasting. Your vision stripped them of their illusions, and without those lies, they were naked. That exposure burned them more than any insult ever could. You dismantled them not by attacking, but by refusing to pretend. And refusal to pretend is deadlier than war. Every illusion eventually cracks. Some people choose to see it early and adjust. Others cling until it breaks them completely. They chose the latter. They cling harder the weaker it gets. That desperation is what makes them crumble when truth finally arrives. But you won't crumble, because you have already chosen truth over illusion. You live with scars, but those scars are solid ground. They live in fantasies, but fantasies collapse under pressure. That is the difference. That is why they will never stand where you stand.